A mysterious visitor. Learn English by reading. Please subscribe to my channel English Clear. For vocabulary, words, and exercises, go to my website englishclearclasses.blogspot.com. In a busy school of adult education, a serious class of serious students was busy decorating their classroom for Halloween. It was dark and stormy, and Mrs. Jensen's English class didn't have many students that particular evening. "Where is everyone?" she asked, turning to her busy students. "The school is closed today, so all the kids are home," said Mike, explaining the absence of some of the students. "That makes sense," said Mrs. Jensen to herself. Her class consisted of adult students, and most of them had kids. She often admired her students' tenacity and resilience in the face of so many challenges. They had tough jobs, kids that required constant attention, and yet they managed to show up for classes and put in 150% effort every time. Her students were very impressive, and she was happy to be teaching such an amazing group of people. On this particular evening, they were decorating for Halloween, which was just a week away. Halloween was one of Mrs. Jensen's favorite holidays. The building where their class was held was small with just a few classrooms. This evening the building was empty, save for Mrs. Jensen's class. "I hear the wind," said Lily, opening her eyes wide. "When I was walking here today, my umbrella got broken by the gust of wind," said Mike. "Where do you want this spider web?" he asked Angie, who was helping him place the spider web strategically around the room. "I think we can put some more on Mrs. Jensen's desk," she said mischievously. Mike winked in response. David and Anna were busy placing monsters and various other decorations on the walls and windows. "Where do you want that zombie?" asked David. "How about Mrs. Jensen's desk?" she suggested. "I think Mrs. Jensen has enough decorations on her desk. Look, she'll have no place to sit soon," he joked. The pair kept searching for better places to put their ghouls and zombies. Suddenly, they heard a big crash. Everyone turned around quickly to see Pat picking up pieces of a pumpkin from the floor. Apparently, he dropped a whole pumpkin on the floor and it didn't survive the fall. Pat started laughing, and pretty soon the whole class followed his lead. "I'm in charge of pumpkins," said Pat out of breath, "and I already destroyed one." He wiped away tears from his face. "Nice lights," said David to Chris and Bianca, who were trying to hang various Halloween lights all around the room. "It will look really spooky once we turn on the lights," said David mysteriously. Bianca agreed with him. She was getting that tingly, excited feeling that people get around this time of year. The decorating was in full swing when Mrs. Jensen heard footsteps out in the hall. She knew that the only class in the building was her class. Therefore, she was quite surprised to hear footsteps. She wasn't really expecting anyone else. However, when she looked out into the hallway, she didn't see anyone. "That's strange," she said to herself. The hallway was empty, and the only sounds were coming out of her classroom. She shrugged off the uneasy feeling and went back to her occupied students. The room was starting to look more and more mysterious, and her students were really getting into the spirit. "So guys, how is it going there?" she asked her class. "I think we'll be done soon," said Lily, struggling with a scarecrow. "Yeah, just a few more minutes, Mrs. Jensen," said Mike. As she watched her students, she heard the footsteps again. Again, Mrs. Jensen looked out of the classroom to see who was walking around. And again, she didn't see anyone in the hallway. "Did you hear that?" asked Angie. Obviously, Angie also heard the footsteps. "Let me go check it out," said Mrs. Jensen. "I'll be right back." She walked towards the empty classrooms apprehensively. However, when she looked into the empty classrooms, they stood empty. "Is anyone here?" she said loudly. There was no answer. "Anyone here?" She repeated the question. Her question was greeted with silence. Mrs. Jensen went back to her classroom. The students were putting some finishing touches on the decorations. "Mrs. Jensen, I think we can proceed with the lesson," said Pat, who placed so many pumpkins all around the room that the classroom could almost pass for a pumpkin farm. "I think you went a little too far with the pumpkins," said Mrs. Jensen, quite amused. "You can never have too many pumpkins," said Pat. "What if we drop them again?" he asked, remembering his recent fiasco. "Okay, guys. If you're ready, then take your seats. We have about half an hour for the lesson." Everybody took their seats and opened up their notebooks. "So, since Halloween is coming soon, can anyone tell us what are some famous American writers of horror?" "Stephen King," someone screamed. The student nodded in delight. "Shirley Jackson," screamed someone else. "Yes, that's right," said Mrs. Jensen. Suddenly, they heard clearly audible footsteps in the hallway. Mrs. Jensen poked her head out into the hallway, but again didn't see anyone. "I get a feeling that there is a ghost walking around the building," said Mrs. Jensen. "I get that feeling too," said Angie. Suddenly, all the lights went out. As soon as all the lights went out, the little Halloween lights that the students hung around the room turned on. "How is this happening?" asked Pat, perplexed. "If the power went out, then all the lights should be completely off. Why are these lights on?" "And who turned them on?" asked Angie, looking at her classmate. Mrs. Jensen looked around a dimly lit room and suddenly screamed. Her gaze rested on a strange shape in the back row in the back of the classroom. All of the students turned around and looked at the strange student in the back of the classroom. "Sir, who are you?" asked Mrs. Jensen with a trembling voice. The student sat with a strange hat covering his face. "I'm new. I just got here," he said in a voice that was barely audible. Mrs. Jensen couldn't see his face as he was sitting in such a way that his face was not visible to the students. "Can you please tell me your name so I can check my records?" said Mrs. Jensen. "They added me at the last minute," he replied. "You won't find my name there." "Well, it's too late to try to get the updated records," said Mrs. Jensen. "Okay, you can stay here for now, but tomorrow I will speak with the administration. Just make sure to stop by my desk before you leave tonight, said Mrs. Jensen. Turning back to the class, she continued, "Do we know any other writers of horror?" "Edgar Allan Poe," screamed Chris. "Very good," smiled Mrs. Jensen. "Can anyone tell us anything interesting about Edgar Allan Poe?" She posed the question to the class. "Edgar Allan Poe was born in Boston," said Angie. "That's right," said Mrs. Jensen. "Can anyone tell me what state is Boston in?" "Massachusetts," she heard multiple screams. "And what are some of his works?" "The Gold Bug," screamed David excitedly. "The Oval Portrait," said Anna eagerly. "Of course, The Telltale Heart," said Mike. "That's correct," said Mrs. Jensen. "Can anyone tell us anything else about the author?" "He passed away under mysterious circumstances," said the student in the back. "That's correct," said Mrs. Jensen. "His stories are full of hidden, secret messages," he continued. "Secret messages? How do you know?" asked Mrs. Jensen. "I know because I am him," spoke the student slowly until every last one of the students in the classroom got goosebumps. As he said those words, the flickering lights that dimly lit their classroom suddenly went out again and plunged the classroom into the total darkness. Everybody screamed and chaos ensued. After a few seconds, all the lights suddenly came back on. When everyone calmed down, they looked at the back row, but the mystery student was gone. His chair stood empty. "Where did he go?" asked David. "No idea," said Angie. "This was really creepy," said Anna, shuddering. "He was a real person, right?" asked Pat, looking at everyone in disbelief. "I will get to the bottom of this tomorrow," said Mrs. Jensen. "Now I think we can call it a day." The students packed up and walked outside the classroom. As they were walking, they looked inside the other empty classrooms. The student was nowhere to be found. The next day, Mrs. Jensen went to the administration office to ask about the new student. "Hi, Liz," greeted Mrs. Jensen, her class coordinator, who was responsible for student attendance. "Hi, Mrs. Jensen," replied Liz Trout, who was a very efficient and competent coordinator. "Liz, did you add a new student to my class?" asked Mrs. Jensen. "No, why would you say that?" replied Liz, puzzled. "There was a student in class yesterday. He said that he was a new add-on," she replied. "I can tell you that it's too late for the add-ons, and I didn't add any new students to your class," replied Liz decisively. "Then who was the man in my classroom?" asked Mrs. Jensen uneasily. Liz Trout shrugged her shoulders. Mrs. Jensen thought about the incident all day. With those thoughts swirling in her head, she walked into the classroom that evening. Her students looked at her questioningly. "Mrs. Jensen, did you find out who that student was?" asked Mike curiously. He wasn't on the list, said Mrs. Jensen. Do you think he was really a ghost like he said? Asked Anna. Did he say that he was a ghost? Asked Lily. He implied it by saying that he was Edgar Allan Poe. Yes, I think he implied that he was a ghost, said Lily, thinking back to the lesson. Okay guys, I suggest we put away thoughts of ghosts and go back to our English lesson, said Mrs. Jensen, trying to seem cheerful as everyone took their seats. Do you think that he gave us a secret message? Asked Anna. Who? Asked Mike. Yesterday's visitor, said Anna thoughtfully. I think he did, said Mrs. Jensen, thinking that she will go to the library and take out all the works of Edgar Allan Poe and read them over again carefully. As she was thinking that, the lights suddenly went out again. The students screamed, and pandemonium ensued again. I hope you enjoyed the story. I might have hidden some secret messages in my story too. Till next time.